Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Laura Renner. She is an author. She is a former neonatal intensive care unit in charge who suffered a traumatic brain injury in 2021. And then later on, she rebuilt her life beyond that. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ.
You're welcome to the show, Laura. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about traumas and healing. So, my first question to you, Laura, is to understand, about your story itself. Uh, for my audience, if I were to say how should they understand who Laura is? I already said about being an author, about being a former neonatal intensive unit care unit, in charge nurse. But I would want you to address the audience so that what you are talking about healing and traumas is a very sensitive topic also, so that they know who exactly they are listening to.
Absolutely. So, I'm somebody who really didn't realize how much trauma I had until my traumatic brain injury. During that time, during my healing process, I found that I was incredibly negative and I had no, confidence or belief that I was going to heal and things were going to be okay. And one day I just kind of had this thought, if I don't change my mindset, I might die. I kept having complications that were life threatening. And I realized that there was a reason that my mind was leaning towards the negative, and I really wanted to get to the bottom of why. And so that ultimately led me to trauma healing because the more I researched mindset shifting and the power of positivity and all of that, everything really just kind of rooted back to trauma. And as I kind of started exploring more of my past, I realized I did actually have a fair amount of trauma. And then the more I kind of went down this rabbit hole of researching, kind of doing a lot of inner reflection, talking to family, and doing a lot of therapy, I actually learned I had a significant amount of trauma, and I had what's called complex trauma or complex PTSD, where basically I had a multitude of different traumatic events throughout my life, throughout my childhood, and into my adulthood that had really impacted me. And a lot of my behaviors and a lot of, just the way I was, my perfectionist tendencies, my people pleasing, my just constant dysregulation within my body, a lot of these things really just directly correlated to trauma. And so then I just kind of became obsessed in a good way, where I just realized, wow, not only do I have a lot to heal, but I have a lot to learn. And also through this process, I can really benefit other people by learning about it. And it really just became something that fascinated me because prior to the brain injury, I had no idea. I thought that a lot of, my crazy work ethic and perfectionist uh, traits were really a good thing. And not that they're bad per se, but I realized that they stemmed out of my traumatic past. And so it really just opened up my eyes a lot about who I was and really how I can help people through sharing my story.
Right, right. Thank you for that. Indeed, Laura. Now let me understand exactly what trauma is all about, because you were in a very responsible position as a neonatal intensive care unit charge nurse, and you say that you had those symptoms of trauma with you, and still you were able to do your job. Being perfectionist in some roles is not bad, like being a nurse, being a surgeon, being an architect, someone who's building a bridge. There you need perfection. But in terms of cleaning your house at midnight, that can wait till morning. So that's a different thing altogether. So I find that is okay. But how does then one continue to be, amidst all those things in your life and still able to perform in whatever role? How does one know whether they have got trauma in their life? Because they, like you were doing your job as they were doing. How would they know that, okay, there is something else also in my mind or in my life or past, in my past early life, So how does that work? Does it happen? Does it have to be a traumatic brain injury like you had in 2021? Then you realized it, or what can others? How do others find out about this thing called trauma, or they have it or they don't have it?
Yeah, great question. I hope that most people don't have to have something traumatic happen to them to kind of, bring them down this path. But for me, I actually think, you know, a lot of people, especially in healthcare, have trauma. I think a lot of people are drawn to healthcare because of trauma, their desire to, help people, and they have a lot of empathy. But also, I do think, not that everyone in healthcare is the same as me, but I actually think my success as a neonatal intensive care unit charge nurse, a lot of it came from my traumatic past and a lot of those traits because excuse me, I had no work boundaries. I worked more overtime than anyone on my unit for an entire year. I always put other people first. I never took breaks. I was always just constantly seeking kind of that adrenaline rush, working with acutely sick babies. It was a lot of chaos all the time. And I kind of thrived in that environment. So I was able to be really calm under pressure and completely kind of disconnect and dissociate from the emotional weight of what was actually happening and what I was experiencing. And so I think for a lot of people, I think a good way to kind of be a little more introspective and see, do I have trauma, is just kind of doing a little research. For me, I personally love researching online, and with the internet these days, it's thankfully so easy, but I found it was really helpful to just kind of start looking into symptoms. And that was really what initially kind of brought me down this path. I was recognizing the more books I was, listening to and podcasts and things like that, I realized, wow, I'm really connecting with a lot of these trauma survivors. I experienced a lot of the anxiety and, issues with self-worth and a lot of the, risky behaviors and a lot of these things. And so I just started kind of diving into books and learning a lot more. And then through that process, I was able to thankfully kind of learn the therapies and modalities and tools that were best suited for me because it's such an individual experience. So I think it really just starts with kind of opening yourself up to the idea of, you know, maybe I did experience some trauma, because I think for many of us, definitely myself included, it's really normalized. A lot of our bad experiences, as children and even as adults, are normalized. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's just kind of reality. But I think kind of taking a step back to recognize, maybe this thing impacted me more than I realize. And maybe there's, this requires a little bit of a deeper dive to heal from. And just so kind of starting to just take those steps to chip away at kind of recognizing, you know, did this impact me, or did something impact me? And kind of, I really just think it all comes down to really just self-reflection, analyzing your thoughts, analyzing your past, and just kind of moving on to see what direction that takes you.
Right, right, Laura. Let's look at it. In as in medical terms, they say, first is diagnosis, then prognosis. And then here we add, is how do you look beyond that? How do you look for a life beyond the prognosis part? Because that's also very important. Like in your case, you were already thriving in that atmosphere, in that situation. But once you found more about yourself, then you must have thought about building up a life after that. How did that work? How did you plan those things? And for others, how do they look at? Because you suddenly thought of moving out of an environment that you were, people would say if you are happy there, or not so happy, but you are thriving, then do not change that. How did you work your life? I want to understand your shift of the whole situation. Either you can call it mindset, then going to writing a book on this. I just want to understand so that people who are in a similar, not maybe not they are, or may not be a nurse, but in whatever they are doing, they can also understand or take a bit of understanding out of your own diagnosis, prognosis, and rebuilding, building your life, and maybe if they can apply it for themselves.
Absolutely. So I'm someone who always had anxiety and depression. And I never realized the severity of my anxiety until I started kind of doing therapy. And I also engaged in a lot of, alcohol and substances. And I did a lot of things to kind of numb myself out. And, through my brain injury healing process, I realized kind of the why. I realized that I had been spending so much of my adult life kind of with blinders on. I was just getting through. I knew my job was heavy. I basically spent the majority of my time outside of work just getting drunk, doing drugs, just spending a lot of time with people, basically just distracting myself. And then with my brain injury, I was forced to basically just rest and just kind of sit with my thoughts. And then I was like, hold on, this isn't good. Like I can't do this. And through that process, it just kind of allowed me to recognize how much I was just, yeah, living with blinders on and how much I was just kind of avoiding myself. And so I hit some really deep lows. I mean, in a lot of my life, I've hit deep lows, but after the brain injury and in my trauma healing process, I hit a lot of really deep lows where I was just like, I don't want to do this. This is awful. And I realized, thankfully, that I could use this as a way to not just empower myself, but to help other people because I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. I know that there's other people who feel worse or just feel even, it doesn't even have to be as bad, but just having these high levels of anxiety and depression on a daily basis are incredibly challenging. So I just felt really inspired to share my story because I was someone, who again had no awareness to trauma, was, successful in society. I was very high achieving, yet I was so deeply struggling inside. So it was really important to me to share my story because I know there are so many other people that are also living like this and, outwardly succeeding, but really struggling deep on the inside. So I found that very important to do. And then with moving forward, it's really just been kind of in a lot of ways taking everything one day at a time because sometimes I still have bad days. I still have days where I get really enveloped in my, struggling mental health or trauma or just, things from the past. And I have to really just kind of remind myself to stay present and stay positive and just kind of keep doing the things to move me forward and stay inspired so that I can, help myself and also help other people.
Right, right. So, Laura, you talk about, reclaiming your power. Did you manage to reclaim your power? What was it like? Was it another job, another sort of a different environment? How should one look at, reclaiming the power after they discover or know more about their, traumas and perhaps healing? And how do they then get down to the practical part of life?
Great question. So, for me, I spent so much of my life, people pleasing, having poor self worth, just letting people, in relationships, friendships, walk all over me and treat me poorly. And I accepted it. I thought that I wasn't worth more. I thought that I didn't deserve more. And so through my trauma healing process, I realized, wow, just because people treated me this way and told me these things about me, that doesn't make them true. So it gave me the power to kind of rewrite my own story and my own beliefs about myself, which, not easy. Rewiring, 34 years of beliefs that I had been told that I can't handle change, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not strong enough, that I'm not smart enough, just rewiring all these beliefs really just completely changed me. And, having that awareness to realize, wow, just because people say it doesn't mean it's true. That was huge for me. And between having, I had sexual abuse as a child, I had a couple near death experiences as a child, I was in an emotionally abusive marriage. I had a lot of things that really just chipped away at my power and my self-worth. And so through my healing process, I realized, no, this doesn't have to be me. This doesn't have to be my story. It can be a part of my story, but it's not who I am. I get to decide and be who I am. And that was the biggest part of me, just rebuilding myself and especially having the power to share my story. I think that's been the biggest thing for reclaiming my power because it's being unashamed of the things that happened to me because I know that they don't they're not who I am. I know who I am and I get to be that person. And so sharing my story has been really one of the best ways to do that.
Absolutely, Laura. And so that's why let's come to your book. No, I'm not fine. Thank you. That's a strong title and a nice one. In fact, being very clear about things that you want to. Normally, you ask someone, they say, I am very fine, but it's not the case. And they still continue to do so, adding to more problems in their life. Tell us about of that. Don't go by what I assume what about it. Tell us what was the reason for this title from your understanding.
That's exactly it. I'm someone personally who always was guilty of saying, "I'm fine." I never opened up, even to myself, about how I was really feeling. I really hid that, and I was often just feeling ashamed or even just kind of not fully aware. I wasn't emotionally intelligent enough to really recognize how I was feeling. So I would always say I'm fine. Sometimes I would even burst into tears and people would be like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, "I'm fine." It was just such a natural thing. And that's a natural thing for a lot of us. I think, just globally, we're all kind of wired in a lot of ways to just be okay. Don't, burden people with your problems. Don't show your weakness, even though emotions aren't weakness. But that's just how we've all kind of lived and gone about our lives. And so it was really important for me to have this title and be like, "No, I'm not okay. Thank you." Because often we say, "I'm fine, thank you," when people ask how you are. But it's really just about saying, "I'm not okay." Even if you look okay, even if you seem okay to other people, it's good to say I'm not okay and kind of open that dialogue and open that thought process, because if we don't share how we're really feeling, we just continue to kind of bury that and not address it. So that was really important for me with the title.
Right, right. Tell us a bit more about the book. What have you dealt in that book? Who is the book for? And so that, those people who may need it, they would know, okay, this is the book for me.
So the book is really for anyone who, you know, kind of senses that things aren't fully okay. Or even, it can be a great gift for people who, if you recognize someone in your life is maybe struggling, but they don't recognize it, because the first couple chapters especially talk about my health issues that happened in the 4 years prior to the brain injury as well, and how basically I was having all these things kind of collapsing around me in my life, but I was still pretending it was fine and everything was okay, until I was forced to fully address what was going on internally within me and heal it. And so I talk very candidly about my process and the struggles that I had during my trauma healing process. you know the how when I took the blinders off, I recognized how many people in my life weren't actually supporting me or beneficial to just me in general. I had a lot of toxic relationships that I realized I needed to cut out. So it's really just kind of this general exposure for me of what my trauma healing journey exposed me to, how I got there, and just all I learned along the way. So I think it's something that a lot of people can benefit from if they have no experience with trauma healing, if they have some, if especially if they're new to it. I think I kind of go over all of the different therapies and modalities that I used, my experience with them, and how they benefited me and how they can benefit others. So I think it's really a great just jumping off point to kind of start assessing, do I relate to this? Is this something that can help me? And kind of how to get started on that journey yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are spreading this message of, healing, knowing about your trauma, and also reclaiming your power. And that is why you have your podcast also, if I understand, healing, no filter. Tell us about the podcast also.
Absolutely. So I love teaching. I did a lot of teaching as a nurse, and I have always been a big science nerd. I love learning. And so I've really just loved learning more about neuroscience, which is funny because in nursing school, I always hated neurology and anything brain related. But it's really just been fascinating to learn about neuroscience and just how much our thoughts impact our actions and our lives, and really just how we see the world. And so the Healing No Filter podcast is a lot of just the lessons that I've learned along the way. And I break down kind of the science behind different modalities and different therapies that I have used, my experience with them, and kind of how they can benefit other people. So it's really just kind of short and sweet episodes that just give my kind of relatable, no nonsense approach that I've learned through research and evidence based modalities to help people heal, whether it's trauma, mindset, or just, general body healing, just healing from a general standpoint to help in any way that it can.
Right, right. You have spoken about it, but I will ask you once again, in the sense, what is it that you seek for yourself by, through your book, through your podcast? You seem very passionate about all these things, from child care, children care to now suddenly a lot of care for a lot of people everywhere.
You know, I'm still very open to my path. So right now I'm still doing a lot of, promoting my book and just trying to get it out there because really just sharing my voice and sharing my story is the most important thing to me right now. So I'm doing that through the book and through the podcast. I've done a speaking event. I plan to do more of those in the future. I'm really just, it's funny because I've always been a very controlling person with myself and with others. And for the first time in my life, I'm kind of leaving it open-ended. I'm really just kind of open to where this journey takes me, which, even just 2 years ago would have absolutely terrified me to do. But now it's really empowering to just kind of see where everything goes. And so I'm utilizing, my platform with social media and the podcast and the book to just really try and expand outward and help other people and also really teach in whatever format that I can and through sharing my story and all of the knowledge that I've learned along the way and whatnot to just help other people. My goal ultimately is to just utilize my experience to help others. And so I'm just really leaving it open-ended at this point to see where that takes me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see it is a great achievement for you in terms of, that some people, including me also, you are a bit afraid or either of, annoying anyone or do not like anyone to be feel bad about of sharing your original thoughts. And then you come out with a book and are ready to tell the world what your thoughts are. That's a big leap, I would say. And that I can see it here also, in a very constrained way. I'm putting it, but this is one way of I as I see it. And I'm sure a lot of people, for them, when they are into a difficult situation, when they are not able to share their thoughts, when they are able to do something like this, then it opens many gates for them for the future. I hope that is for you too, and you find new destinations, new horizons to conquer. A lot of people would like to learn more about you, about your book, about your podcast. So what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. So I have a website. It's my first and last name, laurarenner.me, M-E. And on my website, that has more information about my book, my podcast as well. And it also has a free beginner's guide to trauma healing. And it's basically my ultimate resource guide for a lot of the different modalities that I used. And it gives kind of the research behind it, as well as, resources to find therapists or YouTube or whatever it is. So that's a great way to kind of get started if you'd like to learn about that. Also I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well. My handle is Laura_Ren, RENN. And in both platforms, I'm really just sharing a lot of my experience, sharing a lot about more about my book, and also just about a lot of just the different, neuroscience hacks and trauma healing hacks that I've learned along the way to kind of help others. So those are really the best ways to connect with me.
Wonderful, wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.